What's going on, everyone? Justin again. As always, thanks for watching my channel. Welcome back. Tuesday, baby, right? Getting ready to step into hump day. Today's a special day, so I figured I'd get a special little beer. We decided to pick up some Tecate and a little bit of lime. So today I officially had diagnosed my first check engine light. A little bit of help. Not a lot, a little bit of help. Following the flow chart, going through the steps. Wanted me to do a signature test, right? Woo-hoo! So I get a chance to use the Zeus, and I get a chance to use the lab scope, which is pretty cool. So the code that I had gotten was for camshaft position sensor fault. It was P0340, and this was on an older 03 PT Cruiser with, what is it, the 2.8 or whatever it was. Anyway, so it had me start going through some signature tests. First thing it wanted me to do is basically see if the camshaft position sensor and the crankshaft position sensor were in sync through scan data, which they were, so that was pretty cool, right? Got a chance to look through some scan data, look for that specific thing. The next step, of course, was to gain access to the crankshaft position sensor. I know, kind of weird that it wanted me to do that, but it did. Wanted me to check and verify that there was a signature waveform present through the signal wire, which there was, so that was pretty cool. We also needed to do a signature test of the camshaft position sensor, which there was not. Had a nice little flat line, right? There was somebody that made mention that I could adjust my settings. I'll have to try to watch some of these diagnostic guys' videos and see how they do that, because I hadn't played with it enough in the 4-channel lab scope portion in order to figure out how to zoom in or zoom out yet. So I just kind of went through the guided component test. And then when I needed multiple channels, I went to the 4-channel lab scope, and I had somebody else kind of walk me through on how to set up the basic parameters, like voltage-wise and whatnot, so I can at least see it. And I still didn't have anything. So then I had to do a continuity check of the harness. So went from one end to one end, and we had good continuity. So basically the last step of the whole thing was that to remove the camshaft position sensor and look to make sure there was no damage or obstructions or anything like that, which there wasn't. And then it said the sensor can officially be condemned. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I diagnosed my first check engine light today. Lots of little steps to kind of, it's a different mindset. So when you're doing the nuts and bolts of things, taking something apart and putting it back together, in the beginning, you're going to kind of do a lot of taking things apart that you didn't necessarily need to, and it's going to take you some time before you're able to realize what things you have to take apart in order to do the repair, and which things you do not have to take apart in order to do the repair. And I think it's going to be the same exact way for me when it comes to doing some diagnostic stuff in the future. In the beginning, I'll probably be leaning on service information and going through the library and following flow charts and busting out breakout boxes and things like that, and following along with how the dealership wants me to proceed with the diagnostic, basically how to diagnose it. And of course, there's going to have to be some outside of the box thinking as far as, like, should I go through the entire trouble tree, or, you know, can you change a step and like swap coils and things like that. I don't know. But for right now, I'm having fun with it, man. So it was pretty cool. Again, I'm just going to have to get a new system going. And it's going to also take me a little bit of time to, you know, understand when it's important to volt drop a circuit, or to do a continuity test of a circuit, or when it's important to use the scope portion of the meter that I got. So lots of learning. And in fact, when I had the scope already set up, I didn't want to switch it over to meter and then use that and then have to disconnect leads and everything. So I used my handheld amp clamp meter that I had gotten from Matco to do my continuity test, while still remaining set up in case I needed to go back and do a different test with it, right? So I just left that set up on that little mobile diagnostic table. But it was really cool. I was actually pretty excited about it. I was like, right on. I'm digging it, you know what I mean? It was like learning something new, get a chance to bust it out. You know, another one of those things I was kind of thinking about today, though, outside of diagnostics, was we were talking about this, a buddy of mine, and I was like, he had made mention if I had this, like the fluid testers, like for the brake fluid. And I was like, nah, I don't have that stuff. And he goes, I thought you did at one point. I was like, I mean, I did, but I gave it away to somebody else that was at a dealer tech, because at the independent shop, they don't believe in flushes. Like, we don't do them. Like, if a customer comes in for the brake job, after we get done doing the brake job, as we're retracting the pistons, you're bleeding out whatever .3 fluid is there out of that. And then, of course, you're having to bleed the entire brake system with somebody in the car once everything is all, set back up. So you lose a little bit more fluid, and then we put new fluid in. But we don't have a fluid flush machine for brake services. We don't flush them. But he was like, well, it's important, because by using that, it's got, if it goes past a certain boiling point and it gets to be too hot because of the water, then that's going to damage the internals, and you're going to change the water to brake fluid viscosity. There's some kind of chemical makeup in that .3 fluid that makes it to where basically it prematurely wears out, like the internals of rubber seals and things like that, not just for the master cylinder, but even down to the caliper and the rubber lines themselves. I was like, yeah, I know. I mean, it makes sense, but I just hadn't been in that mentality for a long time. He's like, well, we also need to check the coolant too. And I was like, to see if it's low? He's like, no, to test it. And I was like, oh man, oh, that's right, you guys used to have the little test strips. He's like, right. And the hydrometer, you remember that, right? The little bulbs. And I was like, oh, dude, I got rid of that thing so freaking long ago. I was like, yeah, we don't do that either. The only time that we've ever flushed the cooling system was when there was a clog within the system or a blockage, and we have a special flusher, and we would basically, with air and a garden hose with water, force all the garbage out to see if we can clear it out. And if not, well, then of course we'd have to clear as much of it as we possibly can out before replacing like the heater core or whatever had the blockage. And he's like, yeah, no, dude, like when it says 3 year, it's literally probably good for just 3 years. And then same thing with 5 year. When it's 5 year, yeah, it should be done like every 5 years and that kind of thing. He goes, and then like with the other fluids, you got testers. So of course, these things could possibly need changing sooner depending on the alkalinity and the glycol. And I was like, man, so much stuff to try to like retrain myself back into the dealership mentality, Other things that I've been kind of like struggling with a little bit this week is because now that I'm back to at least level 1, and I'm still trying to practice this for my level 2 assessment. But the notes, it's all about these notes, right? So as you're sending notes in to like parts department or to the service writers and things like that, you have to be very, 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 very specific of every single thing that you want or that that needs to be done, because there's no guesswork on their end. Whatever you ask for is what exactly you're going to get. So like when it comes down to like there's these 3.6 liters, right? They have this oil filter cooler housing, and I know that they leak quite a bit, and when you start getting up there in the mileage, like in the 80 to 100K miles, and I've even heard some guys from like back east that have actually called me like when I was at the independent shop and said, hey man, you ever change one of these out? And I was like, oh yeah, I've changed a couple of them out. And he's like, okay, so like, how hard is it to do? And I said, nah, it's all pretty easy, really. And you just got to take the intake manifold off, the upper and lower, and then you can get down to it and so forth. But you have to torque them down specifically to the spec, otherwise they'll leak again. Well, so I had put a P&A in for one of these, plus other things I thought I would need, but the things that I forgot about or didn't think of, because it's just one of those things that you would probably end up doing, was that I needed to also P&A like the oil, because you change the oil, right, after it leaks, and you got coolant and oil passages and whatnot. And then the other thing was coolant. I forgot to tell them that I needed, a gallon of coolant, because obviously I'm going to lose coolant, and I'm going to have to use the Venturi bleed kit to bleed all the air out of the system once I open it up. So I was like, oh yeah, I forgot, I'm sorry. But you have to be very specific. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that even when I'm sending my P&As through for like these parts, I also have to make sure to send the P&A in if I need fluids too, and to tell them what kind. It's the same thing for like hardware. So if you need hardware, sometimes you can get away with saying hardware kit for that side. Other times you might have to tell them you know, the exact like diameter of it. They have a little measurement tool, and you can thread the thing in, whether it's a nut or a bolt, and you have to measure how long you need it, and then you have to make sure that you tell them how many you're going to need, and if you need washers, how many of those too. So it's that kind of stuff. So you got to be very specific of like everything that you need. Same thing with like the parts wash or the brake cleaner stuff. They generally like to see that on the RO so they know why you're using it. Okay, so if you're doing like a brake service or you're doing an oil change and there was some mess from the oil filter because Dodge Ram's right, messy. So if you need to P&A that, then you need to make sure to put it in the RO so that way they know that you're using it to clean up your mess, right? So it's just been a lot of that. And then keeping up with the information, because you have to cover everything paperwork wise too. So like with your notes, when you're finalizing the repair or when you are sending off the P&A, you have to let them know what it is that you found. So they call it like the 3 C's. You got complaint cause correction or concern cause correction, however you want to look at it. And then you have to type that in there. So in your final story, you have to make sure you have those things in there. Okay, the customer's concern was oil leaking, you know, cause found oil filter cooler housing was the cause of the oil leak, you know, correction, recommend replacement of the oil filter cooler housing assembly plus associated gaskets and oil and coolant, you know, that kind of thing. Set tire pressure to 35 psi. Torqued lug nuts down to 100 foot-pounds. Like you have to have all these notes in there if you took wheels off and everything, right? So on every car that comes in, of course, we have to set tire pressure on every single car that comes in, so you have to annotate that too, so that way you can show that you did it. So lots of just paperwork. I would say the majority of my time now of the some of the repairs is spent paperwork-wise, just to make sure that, like our manager was saying, like all the T's are crossed and all your I's is dotted. Like there's a lot more involved. It's not like when I was at the independent shop where I can just be like, they're like, okay, cool. So you're pulling the trans on this and putting a new one in. Okay, cool. Trans comes in, pull one out, stab the other one in. Most time I don't even need the paperwork unless I need to look up capacity specifications or torque specifications or whatever. Put the new one in, flush the lines with Cooler Clean, but we don't do transmission flushes. We're clearing out the debris from the old one and then clearing the lines out with air and then reconnecting everything, right? But we would not be doing a transmission flush service at the independent shop. It would be a fluid and filter service, right? So, like I said, differences, right? Which I think that over at the dealership, I would suspect that there would be a coolant flushing using their flush machine prior to installing the new transmission. I believe that's how they would do it. And it's going to be about the same kind of ordeal, except for you have an actual machine that hooks up to the lines instead. Something like that. So, subtle differences. Paperwork wise though, I didn't really have to do too much with the paperwork. This even comes down to turning rotors. I was thinking about this today. I was like, well, you know, I sent the P&A in for brake pads and rotors, as well as gave you the total rotor thickness. But I don't know like how much is available measurement wise, because usually like the last guy I had over at the independent shop, the manager, he would just P&A the part and say, okay, rotors cost this much, this was his measurement, this is what the minimum we can cut it to. Okay, go ahead and cut it. Okay, cool, I'd cut it. What was your last measurement after you got done cutting it? This. Okay, you're good, throw it on the car. If it wasn't good, okay, well that's too thin, we're gonna have to go ahead and get them coming, so just stand by and grab something else. It was kind of like that. I didn't have to input anything into a computer. I mean, my computer pretty much stayed here at the house. Now my Zeus is my full-time computer. That designated docking station has been working out great with the USB keyboard and my Bluetooth mouse. It's been working awesome. So, but it's time-consuming for sure. Another time-consuming aspect is sometimes just finding keys or like finding people that I need to figure out what they want to do, what's the next step kind of deal. That kind of takes a little bit of time too, because it's a much bigger facility, so it's not like everyone's within earshot, you know what I mean? Or sometimes they're on road test, sometimes they're at lunch, so it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm like a lost little kid. Where's my adult? Someone hold my hand, you know what I mean? But it hasn't been too bad. I've actually been moving, okay? I've been flowing with it. I've been grooving pretty good. these last 2 days have been a lot slower than pace-wise for me than the first 2 weeks. First 2 weeks, cooking, booking, I had stacks of work to get done, and I was getting it done, and really didn't need to ask anybody, and all the keys was hung. This week, had to hit the brakes a little bit. Had to look for keys, had to look for people, had to change some of the ways that I input notes, had to ask for specific things that I didn't have to ask for the first 2 weeks. So lots of changes this week. Learning my first diagnostic job, really. I mean, I diagnosed a couple of little things electrically and did some wiring harness stuff the week before, but this essentially was my first check engine light from start to finish, plus waiting for the part to repair. So hopefully that works out really good for us. Okay, so I'm very excited about that. Well, at any rate, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Cheers to those of you that have your beers. If you did, make sure to smash the little thumbs up button on your way out the door. And we'll see you guys next time. Cheers and deuces.